Good evening, guys.
Hey,
Alrighty.
how are you doing? Have you
Very
changed
well,
your
thank you.
shirt a couple of times in the last hour and a bit? um, so I've known Dhavall for a few years now. We are both lucky enough to be IWSC judges, and we've had a couple of years doing that together, which has been good fun. And I've obviously been over to the distillery to see you. Um, I've been to all of the distilleries actually, but not. I need to go again very soon. So Davell's going to tell you all about the final whiskey. I know final whiskey already, and this is the Lakes Whiskymakers Reserve #2, which whiskey #3, as I'm sure Davell will explain, would have been ideal for this tasting and should have been released by now. But obviously, with the current situation, there's a lot of distillers and distilleries affected, and particularly at the bottling side of things. So understandably, it has been delayed, which is unfortunate, but it gives us a chance to taste #2. In my case, again, in the case of many people, I'm sure, for the first time. So I'm going to hand over to you, Dhavall. Thanks for being here, and I will. You have a presentation, I think, so I'm going to.
No,
No,
I don't actually. I'm just gonna
no,
talk
just
about what we do, how we do it, rather than the presentation. I hope that's okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Happy V-Day to you all. And Eddie, thank you for organizing this and involving Lakes, in this session. It's great and amazing conversation so far. And I think just to give you a bit of background before I go in to the details about whiskey and what we will be tasting today. Lakes was set up and we started distilling in December of 2014, but technically 2015 is when we started distilling whiskey. And we are a single malt whiskey distillery. That's what we do 7 days a week and 325 days a year. And I'm saying 325 days because the rest of days are plant maintenance, but every single day the distillery is up, we make single malt whiskey. That's what we do. The distillery was started by our two founders, Paul Curry from Isle of Arran originally, and then he wanted to start a distillery in England. And Nigel Mills is a Northeast-based entrepreneur. And both of them got together and had this plan of creating an English whiskey distillery in the Lake District. And as Eddie's showing you guys, what we'll be tasting today is the Lakes Whiskymakers Reserve #2. That's the bottle. I'll tell you more about the whiskey and the process, but just so that you can pour yourself a dram and we can just talk while you are having it. Lakes Whiskymaker Reserve is cask strength, and it's made up predominantly of PX cask. And I'm a big fan, and I'm a student of sherry maturation. And that's what I do. That's what I go deeper in. So this is PX cask, pretty much the backbone, the very, very core foundations of it. Also a red wine cask. And again, I use red wine cask just to add a little bit of acidity to the whiskey, just a bit of vibrancy to it, just in a very small proportion. And it only has roughly 1.5 to 2 bourbon casks. And the only reason for using bourbon is sometimes I like to pull certain flavors out and more stretch the flavors that are coming from PX. But it's predominantly heavily sherried whiskey dram. Now, just to give you an idea, this is cask strength, but I'm not going to tell you how to drink it. Drink the way you like it. If you want to add water, ice, just be yourself. But just get a chance to nose it. It's the style that we try to make at Lakes is very, very flavor packed, sherry led, and wood forward. And that's the style I love drinking, and that's the style we love making at Lakes. And now I'll tell you a little bit more about the process. And what we do, how we do it. We have 10 minutes roughly. That's what I was told by Eddie. So I'm going to make sure that we get some room for question and answers. Okay, so like what our colleagues from the English whiskey have mentioned earlier, for us, or for me particularly, I'm a blender. And for me, the process doesn't start with water or barley or the farm. It starts with the forest. I am passionate about wood, and that's what I do. That's what I love. That's what I study, and that's where my research is on. So I was brought into from Macallan in 2016 by Paul and Nigel and Alan Rutherford, our chairman. And the whole idea was to create a single malt whiskey that is distinctive, but also quite unique in its own way. And I was brought in to create a style, house style for the whiskey, at the same time develop the whiskey strategy of how the whiskey for lakes is going to be. And being a blender and being a guy who loves maturation and sherry whiskeys, I always start my process at the very end. What I wanted to create. We wanted to create a very, very flavor-packed, sherry-led, whiskey that was more of a sherry bomb in the terms. And to do that, I started looking at the new make spirit and all the process. So we go backwards now, based on the flavor I was trying to create. I went in and started working on new make spirits. So first of all, before we go on to the fermentation process, which is key for us to create the flavor that we need, we use unpeated barley, and right now we use Concerto, and we have been trialing Laureate. So nothing special about that, the same barley that's used in majority of the distilleries. And one other key factor, just because Paul Curry, one of our founders, came from Isle of Arran, he cut his teeth in Scotch. Our chairman, Dr. Alan Rutherford from Diageo, and I came from Macallan. We love Scotch. So lakes, by all means, even though we are in England, we are Scotch style. So, and we follow the Scotch Whisky Association rules and regulations. I mean, that's fine, because there's so much room for us to play around with that there's no need to change. So we are very, very Scotch style whiskey. We have 2 pot stills, a balance system, and right now our current plan is around 130,000 liters of alcohol, but we are in the midst of expansion process at the moment, which takes us to around 400,000 liters of alcohol. And now, talking about the new make spirit, we have 2 different new make spirits that we make at Lakes. There's Type A, Type B. Type A is light to medium body, fruity, estery spirit, and a lot of cucumber flavor that I like in the spirit. It's much more lighter, but it has the body. Now, we wanted to, like I said, I start with the end of the process. We wanted to create a whiskey that is much more sherry-led, and that involves using European oak. And not, when I say European oak, I'm talking about mostly Spanish oak and a little bit of French oak coming in. We wanted the whiskey to be a little bit more heavy, need to have a little bit of body and character, because what you want to do, if your spirit is too light, as Dan was saying, over time, the spirit gets overpowered by wood. And if you're trying to use a lot of European oak, it gets a little bit much more heavy and burdened by that. So that's a Type A spirit, light to medium body flavored. And then we have a Type B spirit, which is medium to heavy, slightly more sulfury, and has more character, with more waxiness, oiliness character. Now, when we go through the fermentation process, something that I borrowed from the perfume industry, and I love reading and taking ideas and concepts from different domains and applying to the world of whiskey. So one thing I did was taking the perfumer's triangle, which has 3 different layers or distinct layers, the top notes, middle notes, and base notes. So what we do at Lakes, we use different yeast in different combinations at different times during the week to give you 3 different styles of spirit coming out. And one can be much more focused on the top notes that's coming through the esters, the fruity flavors. One is more focused on the base, which has the structure, the body, the oiliness to it to hold up to it. It's more of the skeleton. And then you have a little bit of muscle and you have the fat. So, and then we have the base one, which gives you slightly oily waxiness. Now, we use 3 different yeast, and we use one yeast, which is a standard M strain. Then we use a French yeast to give me the middle notes. And then we use a heritage yeast, which was discontinued in the Scotch whisky industry. It was notorious, and it's still notorious for yields. So to give you an idea, when you ferment something, a ton of barley can roughly give you around 400, 405 liters of alcohol per ton of barley. That's a standard yeast strain, roughly. But the heritage yeast we use gives around 300 liters of alcohol. But that yeast gives us that waxiness, heaviness, that oiliness that I like to get a good sherry malt at the very, very end. So that's the focus of creating. Now, all these fermentations happen on different days with different combinations. And at the end of the week, we blend those spirit to the combination that I want, the proportion that I want, and then goes into the cask. The fermentation times are long. Our all fermentations are minimum of 96 hours. But when I say minimum, I pursue two things. I have a split personality, you can say, when I'm whiskey making. One is of complete control and complete precision, and one is complete laid back. So my front end of the process, the distillation, fermentation, I control all the parameters very, very minutely. So when I say 96, our highest temperature time that goes for fermentation is probably 96, 96.5. And that's the highest we'll go. Now, we can go longer. Longer doesn't mean any better or you're doing anything special out there. It depends on the style of the spirit you are trying to create. For us, 96 gives us that yogurty texture that I want because, as Dan mentioned earlier, you get into the malolactic fermentation, and that's what I like. But if I go over it, it becomes too oily and flat and not as interesting as I would like it to be. So for us, 96 is where we thought the perfect balance was. And we tried all different kinds of yeast. So since I joined from Macallan in 2016, we did 122 different trials of using every yeast available in the marketplace until I found the exact one that worked very well with the type of spirit I was trying to create. And then once the fermentation is done, it moves into our distillation process. Very standard Scotch-style distillation, 2 stills, wash still, spirit still. We have kind of narrow cuts, but not as narrow because our cut points are roughly around 67. Because I like a little bit of that heaviness in the spirit as well, because we are trying to more focus on the longer term than creating something much more lighter and fruitier at the very early end. And then once the distillation is done, that is where the control ends and the complete laid back, careless artist comes into play, where I start playing tunes with different casks. Now, this is where, for me, this cask is my instrument, and that's how I create the flavor in the whiskey you are drinking today as well. And mostly, we are a sherry-led distillery, so most of the casks that we buy are sherry, first fill sherry cask. And for me, there are 3. I like to keep things simple. So for us, it's just Oloroso. That is the very, very core structure and the foundation for all lake malt, followed by PX and Fino cask. Now, PX and Fino give me, PX I use mostly for texture, mostly for certain richer aromas and richer flavors that I want to get in the whiskey. And Fino cask just adds a little bit of acidity, a little bit of vibrancy towards the whole whiskey. Now, I'm saying 3 casks doesn't mean we only fill 3 casks, but I have, between PX and Oloroso, I have 25 or 26 different casks that have different combinations. And when I'm talking about different combinations, I can have in American oak, Spanish oak, French oak. I can have in Hungarian, Romanian oak. I can have different toasting levels. I can have different air seasoning times. I have different seasoning times for the wine. I have different ages for the wine I go. So I like to go deeper than going more broader. So there is no novelty here. I like to take classic and I like to make it perfect the way it can be. So that's how the focus for us is those 3 casks at Lakes. But we do fill a lot of Manzanilla. We have a lot of other Amontillado, Palo Cortado. We have a lot of Moscatel. We have all different kinds of casks. But for the flavor, the house style that we try to create is just 3 different casks. Now, what we do is, one of the other things we do is very, very slow reduction. And this is the technique that I take and borrowed from the French cognac and brandy industry, is very, very slow reductions. So before the spirit gets blended, first of all, the blending happens during the spirit, not post maturation. So we already blend the spirit in the style that I'm trying to create in the later end of the stages. And then what happens is the reduction, rather than reducing it all the way from 70 to filling strength, for us is 63 and 58. So we fill in 2 alternative strengths. Rather than filling it all the way straight, I do very, very slow trickle down reduction, which is like 8 liters an hour. So very, very slow. It takes a whole day for us to reduce the whiskey very slowly, because I don't want to shock the spirit. And something, if you read more about into the way the brandy producers work, the way cognac and Armagnac industries work, they use that technique, because what you don't want to do is shock the spirit out. So that's a very, very easy, gradual way of reduction. And then we put it in cask at different strengths, depending on the style I'm trying to create, because for lower strength, I can get a different maturation. For higher strength, I can get different maturation. And once the cask is in, that's where I keep on evaluating those casks at a time. As a blender, that's something that I love doing. I look at each cask probably around at least 15 to 20 times during the course of life, from all the way from distillation all the way till bottling. And then comes the time of blending. So I use different casks to create different pockets of flavor. So it's not as simple as, okay, fill it in Moscatel and, 5, 6, 7 years down the line, empty 10 Moscatel casks and there you go, it's a bottling. It's all about different flavor profiles. So some casks have much more heavier, dry ginger flavor. Some have much more characters of nutmeg and sultana. Some have much more richer flavors of, wild berries and, plums and plum fruits. So what I do is basically create more of an inventory of different flavors using different casks. And that is at the blending stage. That's when I put together. So talking about the Lakes whiskey. So if you look at the Whiskymaker's Reserve, number 1, number 2, and the upcoming number 3, they are not batches. Number 1, number 2 are not batches. They're not supposed to be the same. They have the same DNA. They're kids of the same household, but they have their own individual characters. So Whiskymaker's Reserve number 1 was much more intense and vibrant, and it was on the face, very, very confident, loud, and full of sherry. Number 2 is much more restrained. It has a bit of vanilla character. It's much more elegant. Number 3 is much more aromatic and much more seductive. The other thing to give all these flavor profiles, when you see, it's the same style. So when you drink all the 3 whiskeys, you will have the same DNA coming through, but the expression is very, very different. And that's where comes the process of élevage. And again, I take that from, Calvados producers, brandy producers, a lot of cognac producers. I move the liquid over many times, depending on the flavor that I'm trying to create or the layers that I'm trying to build up on. So something can start very simply as, something with lot of rich wild figs, sultanas, and dried raisins, and I can have that as the core. And then I can start working on and move into a much more oloroso cask to give it a layer of dry ginger character. And then that liquid can be moved into different casks. So, for example, something that I always do, I grew up in India, but I spent most of my life in America and UK. But, something that we do in Indian food is after you cook a curry, the garam masala, if you guys know about Indian curries, you add at the very end of the process. Because if you add the garam masala very early in the process, you risk the burning of the spices, and then you destroy the flavor and aroma characters. So something that I apply for Lakes whiskey is I have a lot of French oak cask, and I love French oak. It can be very, very dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, because French oak can completely overpower the whiskey, but they give you this amazing aromatic nature. You can have incense, you can have sandalwood, you can have a lot of different exotic spices coming from French oak. And what I do is at the very end, that's when I add the French oak influence of whiskey in to give that aromatic flavor profile. So if you look at Whiskymaker's 3, it has a lot of influence of that French oak aromaticness coming out. It's more spicy. So those are the some of the techniques or some of the philosophies that I use. And again, there is no right or wrong. I mean, as you saw today, whiskey making is all about philosophy. Philosophy is very, very key when you are a maker. And nobody's trying to make bad whiskey. Everybody loves whiskey. Everybody's trying to make the best they can. It's all the philosophy that we try to get across.